Where's Sarah? I miss Sarah. She's always here. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. Oh, also, my mom left her wallet in my car, so she will be coming and getting that. So if you hear someone open my... That's right! She is in Florida. I forgot. But anyway, if you hear someone open my door, it's not like a burglar or anything. It's my mother. Okay, chapter 10. Dorian shivered as he entered the kennels that afternoon, brushing snow from his red cloak. Beside him, Cale puffed air into his cupped hands, and the two young men hurried farther inside, the straw-coated floors crunching underfoot. Dorian hated winter, the intolerable cold and the way his boots never seemed completely dry. They had chosen to enter the castle through the kennels because it was the easiest way to avoid Holland, Dorian's 10-year-old brother, who had returned from school that morning and was already shrieking demands at anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. Holland would never look for them here. He hated animals. They strode through the chorus of barking and whining, Dorian pausing every now and then to greet a favorite hound. He could have spent the rest of the day here, if only to avoid the court dinner in honor of Holland. I can't believe my mother pulled him out of school, he muttered. She missed her son, Cale said, rubbing his hands together, though the kennels were deliciously warm compared to outside. And now that there's this movement growing against your father, he wants Holland where he can keep an eye on him until he gets it sorted out. Until Selena kills all the traitors, was what Cale didn't need to say. Dorian sighed. I don't even want to imagine what sort of absurd gift my mother bought him. Do you remember the last one? Cale grinned. It was hard not to remember the last gift Georgina had bought her younger son, 4 white ponies with a tiny golden carriage for Holland to drive about himself. He'd trampled half of the Queen's favorite garden. Cale led them toward the doors at the far end of the kennels. You can't avoid him forever. Even as the captain spoke, Dorian could see him scanning, as he always did, for any sign of danger, any threat. After so many years, Dorian was used to it, but it still rankled his pride a little bit. They passed through the glass doors and into the castle. To Dorian, the hall was warm and glowing. Wreaths and garlands of evergreens still decorated archways and tabletops. To Cale, he supposed, an enemy could be waiting anywhere. Maybe he's changed in the past few months. Matured a little, Cale said. You said that last summer, and I almost punched his teeth out. Cale shook his head. Thank the word my brother was always too afraid of me to talk back. Dorian tried not to look surprised. Since Cale had abdicated his title as heir of Anil, he hadn't seen his family in years, and rarely spoke about them. Dorian could have gleefully killed Cale's father for disowning him, refusing even to see Cale when he brought his family to Rifthold for an important meeting with the king. Even though Cale had never said it, Dorian knew the scars went deep. Dorian sighed loudly. Remind me again why I'm going to this dinner tonight? Because your father will kill you and me if you don't show up and formally greet your brother. Maybe he'd hire Selena to do it. She has dinner plans tonight, with Archer Finn. Isn't she supposed to kill him? She wants information, apparently. A heavy pause. I don't like him. Dorian stiffened. They had managed, at least for the afternoon, to not talk about her, and for those few hours it had been like nothing had ever changed between them. But things had changed. I don't think you need to worry about Archer stealing her away, especially if he's going to be dead by the end of the month. It came out sharper and colder than he intended. You see it? Bye, ho.
The contacts download is starting. Some phones require...
No, thank you. My God.
Download was unsuccessful.
Oh my God. That scared me. Cale cut a glance at him. You think that's what I'm worried about? Yes, and it's obvious to everyone except the two of you. But he didn't want to have this conversation with Cale, and Cale sure as hell didn't want to have this conversation with him, so Dorian just shrugged. She'll be fine, and you'll laugh at yourself for worrying. Even if he's all well guarded as she claims, she's the champion for a reason, right? Cale nodded, though Dorian could still see the worry in his eyes. Selena knew the scarlet dress was a little scandalous, and she knew that it was definitely not appropriate for winter, given how low the front dipped and how much lower the back went, low enough to reveal through the black lace mesh that she wasn't wearing a corset beneath. But Archer Finn had always liked women who were daring with their clothes, who were ahead of the trend, and this dress, with its close-fitting bodice, long, tight sleeves, and gently flowing skirt, was about as new and different as it came. Which was why, when she ran into Cale on her way out of her rooms, she wasn't very surprised when he stopped dead and blinked, then blinked again. Selena smiled at him. "Hello to you, too." Cale stood in the hallway, his bronze eyes traveling down the front of her dress, then up again. "You're not wearing that." She snorted and walked past him, deliberately giving him a view of the far more provocative back. "Oh, yes, I am." Cale fell into step beside her as she made her way down to the front gate and the waiting carriage. "You're going to catch your death." She slung her ermine cloak around her. "Not with this, I won't." "Do you even have any weapons with you?" She stomped down the main staircase that led to the entrance hall. "Yes, Cale, I have weapons, and I'm wearing this dress because I want Archer to ask the same thing, to think I don't have any on me." There were indeed knives strapped to her legs, and the pins sweeping her hair into a curling cascade down one shoulder were long and razor-sharp, commissioned, to her delight, by Philippa. So she didn't need to go traipsing around with cold metal jammed between your breasts. "Oh," was all Cale said. They reached the main entrance in silence, and Selena slipped on her kid gloves as they neared the towering double doors that opened into the courtyard. She was just about to walk down the front steps when Cale touched her shoulder. "Be careful," he said, examining the carriage, the driver, the footman. "They seem to pass inspection. Don't put yourself at risk." "I do this for a living, you know." She never should have told him about her capture, never should have let him see her as vulnerable, because now he'd just worry about her and doubt her and irritate her to no end. She didn't know why she did it, but she took off his touch and hissed, "I'll see you tomorrow." He stiffened, as if he'd been struck, his teeth flashing. "What do you mean tomorrow?" Again, that stupid, bright anger took over, and she gave him a slow smile. "You're a smart boy," she said, stalking down the steps to the carriage. "Figure it out yourself." Cale kept staring as though he didn't know her, his body so very still. She wouldn't have him thinking her vulnerable or foolish or inexperienced, not when she'd worked so hard and sacrificed so much to get to this point. Maybe it had been a mistake to let him in, because the idea of him thinking that she was weak, that she needed to be protected, made her want to shatter someone's bones. "Good night," she said, and before she could reconsider all that she just implied, she got into the carriage and drove away. She'd worry about Cale later. Tonight, her focus was on Archer and on getting the truth out of him. Archer was waiting inside an exclusive dining room, frequented by the elite of Rifthold. Most of the tables were already occupied, the patrons' fine clothes and jewels glimmering in the dim light. As the servant at the front helped her out of her cloak, she made sure that she was angled away from Archer, so he could get an eyeful of the exquisite black lace that covered the open back, and mostly concealed her scars from Endovier. She felt the eyes of the servant on her too, but pretended not to notice. Archer let out a breath, and she turned to find him grinning, slowly shaking his head. "I think stunning, beautiful, and dazzling are the words you're looking for," she said. She took his arm as they were escorted to a table tucked into an alcove of the ornate room. Archer ran a finger along the red velvet sleeve of her gown. "I'm glad to see your taste matured along with the rest of you, and with your arrogance, it seems." She would have smiled anyway, she told herself. Once they were seated, had the menu recited to them, and ordered the wine, Selena found herself staring into that exquisite face. "So," she said, leaning back in her seat, "how many ladies want to kill me tonight for monopolizing your time?" He gave a laugh like a tickle of breath. "If I told you, you'd be bolting back to the castle." "You're still that popular?" Archer waved a hand, taking a sip from his wine. "I still have my debts to Clarice," he said, naming the most influential and prosperous madam in the capital. "But yes," a twinkle gleamed in his eye. "And what of your Shirley friend?" "Should I watch my back tonight?" This was all a dance, a prelude to what would come later. She winked at him. "He knows better than to try to keep me locked up." "Word help the man who does. I still remember what a hellion you were." And here I was thinking you found me charming. And the way a mountain cat's cub is charming, I suppose. She laughed and drank a small sip of her wine. She had to keep her head as clear as possible. When she set her glass on the table, she found Archer giving her that contemplative, sad look he'd given her yesterday. Can I ask you how you came to work for him? She knew he meant the king, and also knew he was aware they weren't the only people in the dining room. He was good. He would have made a good assassin. Perhaps the king's suspicions weren't so far-fetched. But she'd prepared for this question and countless others, so she gave him a wicked smile and said, "Turns out my skills are better suited to aiding the Empire than they are to mining. Working for him and working for Arabin are nearly the same." That wasn't a lie, actually. Archer gave a slow, considering nod. "Our professions have always been similar, yours and mine. I can't tell which is worse, training us for the bedroom or the battlefield." If she recalled correctly, he'd been 12 when Clarice had discovered him as an orphan, running wild in the capital streets, and invited him to train with her. And when he turned 17 and had the bidding party for his virginity, there had been rumors of actual brawls breaking out among would-be patronesses. I can't tell either. They're equally horrible, I suppose. She lifted her wine glass in a toast. "To our esteemed owners." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before he lifted his glass and murmured, "To us." The sound of his voice was enough to make her skin heat, but the look in his eyes as he said it, the curve of that divine mouth. He was a weapon, too. A beautiful, deadly weapon. He leaned over the edge of the table, pinning her to the spot with his stare, a challenge and an intimate invitation. Gods above, and words save me. She actually needed to take a long sip of her wine this time. "It's going to take more than a few sultry glances to make me your willing slave, Art." Sorry, I have a burp and it will not come out. "Archer, you should know better than to try the tricks of your trade on me." He let out a low, rumbling laugh that she felt in her core. "And I think you know well enough to realize that I'm not actually using them. If I were, then we would have left the restaurant already." Oh, that's a bold claim. "I don't think you'd want to go head to head with me when it comes to tricks of the trade." "Oh, I want to do a..." Hold on, this dude. She'd never been so grateful to see a servant in her life, and never realized that a bowl of soup could be so immensely interesting. Since she'd dismissed her carriage just to spite Kale and back up her insinuation, Selena wound up in Archer's carriage after dinner. The meal itself had been pleasant enough. Talk of old acquaintances, the theater books, and the miserable weather. All comfortable, safe topics, though he'd kept looking at her like she was his prey, and this was one long hunt. They sat beside each other on the bench of the carriage, close enough that she could smell whatever fine cologne he wore, an elegant, tantalizing blend that made her think of silk sheets and candlelight, so she turned her mind to what she was about to do. The carriage rolled up to a stop, and Selena glanced out the small window to see a familiar, beautiful townhouse. Archer looked at her and gently twined her fingers with his before raising her hand to his lips. It was a soft, slow kiss that burned through her. He murmured onto her skin, "Do you want to come inside?" Hold on. She swallowed hard. "Don't you want a night off?" This was not what she'd expected, and this was not what she wanted, flirting aside. He lifted his head, but still held her hand, his thumb caressing small circles into her flame-hot skin. "It's immensely different when it's my choice, you know. Someone else might have missed it, but she'd also grown up without choices and recognized the glimmer of bitterness." She eased her hand out of his. "Do you hate your life?" Her words were barely more than a whisper. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as though he somehow hadn't seen her until just now. "Sometimes," he said, and then his eyes shifted to the window behind her and to the townhouse beyond it. "But someday," he went on, "someday I'll have enough money to pay off Clarice forever, to really be free and live on my own." "You'd leave behind being a courtesan?" He gave her a half-smile that was more real than any expression she'd seen him give tonight. "By that point, I'll either be rich enough that I won't ever have to work, or old enough that no one will want to hire me." She had a flicker of memory from a time when, just for a moment, she'd been free, when the world had been wide open and she'd been about to enter it with Sam at her side. It was a freedom that she was still working for, because even though she tasted it only for a heartbeat, It had been the most exquisite heartbeat she'd ever experienced. She took a steadying breath and looked him in the eye. It was time. The king sent me to kill you. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Scared. Chapter 11. His training with the assassins must have paid off, because Archer was across the carriage and brandishing a hidden dagger between them before she could blink. Please, he breathed, his chest rising and falling in uneven patterns. Please, Lena. She opened her mouth, ready to explain everything, but he was gasping down breaths, his eyes wide. I can pay you. A small, wretched part of her was fairly smug at the sight of him cowering, but she held up her hands, showing him she was unarmed, at least as far as he could see. The king thinks you're part of a rebel movement that's interrupting his agenda. A harsh, barked laugh, so raw that none of the smooth, lovely man was even recognizable in the sound. I'm not part of any movement. Word damn me. I might be a whore, but I'm not a traitor. She kept her hands where he could see them, and opened her mouth to tell him to shut up, sit down, and listen. But he went on. I don't know anything about a movement like that. I haven't even heard of anyone who dared try to get in the way of the king, but... His panting evened out. If you spare me, I can feed you information about a group that I know is starting to gather power in Rifthold. The king is targeting the wrong people? I don't know, he said quickly. But this group, this one, he'd probably want to know more about. It seems like they recently learned that the king might be planning some new horror for us all, and they want to try to stop him. If she were a nice, decent person, she'd tell him to take the time to calm himself, to right his mind. But she wasn't a nice, decent person, and his panic was giving his tongue free rein, so she let him go on. I've only heard my clients whispering about it, every now and then, but there's a group that's formed, right here in Rifthold, and they want to put Aelin... I feel like I've heard that name before. Galanthinius? Galanthinius? Back on Terrason's throne. Her heart stopped beating. Aelin... the lost heir of Terrason. Aelin is dead, she breathed. Archer shook his head. They don't think so. They say she's alive, and that she's raising an army against the king. She's looking to reestablish her court, to find what's left of King Orlon's inner circle. She just stared at him, willing her fingers to unclench, willing air into her lungs. If it were true... No, it wasn't true. If these people actually claimed to have met the heir to the throne, then she had to be an imposter. Was it mere coincidence that Nehemiah had mentioned Terrason's court this morning? That Terrason was the one force capable of standing against the king, if it could get to its feet again, with or without the true heir. But Nehemiah had sworn to never lie to her. If she'd known anything, she would have said it. Selena closed her eyes, though she was aware of Archer's every movement. In the darkness, she pulled herself together, shoved down that desperate, foolish hope until nothing but an ageless fear blanketed it again. She opened her eyes. Archer was gaping at her, his face white as death. I have no intention of killing you, Archer, she said. He sagged against the bench, releasing his grip on the dagger. I'm going to give you a choice. You can fake your own death right now and flee the city before dawn. Or I can give you until the end of the month. 4 weeks. 4 weeks to discreetly get your affairs in order. I assume you have money tied up in Rifthold, but the time comes at a cost. I'll keep you alive only if you can get me information about whatever this Terrason rebel movement is, and whatever they know about the king's plans. At the end of the month, you will fake your death, and you will leave this city. Go someplace far away, and never use the name Archer Finn again. He stared carefully, warily at her. I'll need the rest of the month to untangle my money. He loosed a breath, then rubbed his face with his hands. After a long moment, he said, Perhaps this is a blessing in disguise. I'll get to be free of Clarice and start my life anew somewhere else. Though he gave her a wobbly smile, his eyes were still haunted. Why did the king even suspect me? She hated herself for feeling such pity for him. I don't know. He just handed me a piece of paper with your name on it and said you were a part of some movement to upset his plans, whatever those may be. Archer snorted. I only wish I could be that sort of man. She studied him. The strong jaw, the broad frame, all suggested strength, but what she'd seen just now, that was not strength. Cale had known right away what sort of man Archer was. Cale had seen through the illusion of strength, and she hadn't. Shame heated her cheeks, but she made herself speak again. Do you truly think you can uncover information about this movement from Terrason? Even though the heir had to be an imposter, the movement itself was worth looking into. Elena had said to look for clues. She might find some here. Archer nodded. There's a ball tomorrow night at a client's house. I've heard him and his friends murmuring about the movement. If I sneak you into the party, it might give you a chance to look around his office. Maybe you'll even find real traitors at the party, not just suspects. And some ideas about what the king might be up to. Oh, this information could be very useful. Send along the details to the castle tomorrow morning. Care of Lillian Gordania, she told him. But if this party turns out to be a load of nonsense, I'll reconsider my offer. Don't make me look like the fool, Archer. Your Arabin's protege, he said quietly, opening the carriage door and keeping his distance as best he could while he exited. I wouldn't dare. Good, she said. And Archer? He paused, a hand on the carriage door. She leaned forward, letting a bit of that wicked darkness shine through her eyes. If I find out that you aren't being discreet, if you draw too much attention to yourself or attempt to flee, I will end you. Is that clear? He gave her a low bow. I'm your eternal servant, milady. And then he gave her a smile that made her wonder whether she'd regret her decision to let him live. Leaning into the carriage bench, she thumped on the ceiling and the driver headed to the castle. Though she was exhausted, she had one last thing to do before bed. She knocked once, then opened the door to Cale's bedroom just wide enough to peer in. He was standing, frozen before the fireplace, as if he'd been in the middle of pacing. I thought you'd be asleep, she said, slipping inside. It's past 12. He folded his arms across his chest, his captain's uniform rumpled and unbuttoned at the collar. Then why bother stopping by? I thought you weren't coming home tonight, anyway. She pulled her cloak tighter around her, her fingers digging into the soft fur. She lifted her chin. Turns out Archer wasn't as dashing as I remembered. Funny how a year and end of year can change the way you see people. His lips tugged upward, but his face remained solemn. Did you get the information you wanted? Yes, and then some, she said. She explained what Archer had told her, pretending that he'd accidentally given her the information, of course. She explained the rumors surrounding the lost heir of Terrason, but left out the bits about Aelin. I have to figure out this name. Galanthinus. No. Y'all, I know it's really not that hard, but I'm struggling here. Galanthinius, okay. Seeking to reestablish her court and raise an army. And about Archer not really being in the movement. Oh, and about wanting to uncover the king's true plans. When she finished telling Cale about the upcoming ball, he walked up to the mantel and braced his hands against it, staring at the tapestry hanging on the wall above. Though it was faded and worn, she instantly recognized the ancient city nestled into the side of a mountain above a silver lake. Anil, Cale's home. When are you going to tell the king? He asked, turning his head to look at her. Not until I know if this is actually real, or until I use Archer to get as much information as I can before I kill him. He nodded, pushing off the mantle. Just be careful. You keep saying that. Is there something wrong with saying it? Yes, there is. I'm not some silly fool who can't protect herself or use her head. There it goes. Ooh, did I ever imply that? No, but you keep saying be careful and telling me how you worry and insisting you help me with things, and because I do worry. Well, you shouldn't. I'm just as capable of looking after myself as you are. He took a step toward her, but she held her ground. Believe me, Selena, he snarled, his eyes flashing. I know you can look after yourself, but I worry because Galathinius. Oh, Galathinius. Okay. Anyway, but I worry because I care. God's help me. I know I shouldn't, but I do. So I will always tell you to be careful because I will always care what happens. She blinked. Oh, was all she managed. He pinched the bridge of his nose and squeezed his eyes shut. then took a long, deep breath. Selena gave him a sheepish smile. Smile. I guess he's alright. The thing with me is it really doesn't take much to woo me other than just like nice words. Like if he's nice, he's already ahead, which is terrible, but I still think it should have been Dorian, but whatever. Chapter 12. The mask was held in a riverfront. Sorry. Mask. Is it mask? Whatever. Was held in a riverfront estate along the Avery, and was so packed that Selena had no trouble slipping in with Archer. Philippa had managed to find a delicate white gown made up of layers of chiffon and silk patterned like overlapping feathers. A matching mask obscured the upper half of her face, and ivory feathers and pearls had been woven into her hair. It was fortunate it was a masquerade and not a normal party, since she certainly recognized a few faces in the crowd. They were mostly other... Is she gonna see Arabin? I'm scared. Oh God. They were mostly other courtesans she'd once known, along with Madame Clarice. During the carriage ride here, Archer had promised that Arabin Hamel wasn't attending. Okay, well that means he's definitely going now. So great. Ah, fuck. And neither was Lysandra, a courtesan with whom Selena had a long, violent history, and someone she was fairly certain she'd kill if she ever saw again. As it was, just seeing Clarice floating through the party, arranging between her courtesans and the guests was enough to set Selena on edge. While she had come as a swan, Archer had dressed as a wolf, his tunic pewter, his slender pants dove gray, and his boots shining black. His wolf mask covered all but his sensual lips, which were currently parted in a rather wolfish smile as he squeezed the hand she had on his arm. "Not the grandest party we've ever been to," he said, "but Davis has the best pastry chef in Rifthold." Indeed, throughout the room, tables were overflowing with the most beautiful, decadent-looking pastries she'd ever seen. Pastries stuffed with cream, cookies dusted with sugar, and chocolate beckoning to her everywhere. Perhaps she'd swipe a few before she left. It was an effort to return her gaze to Archer. How long has he been your client?" That wolfish smile flickered. "A few years now, which is how I noticed the change in his behavior." His voice dropped to a whisper, the words tickling her ear as he leaned in. "He's more paranoid, eats less, and holds up in his office any chance he gets." At the other end of the domed ballroom, massive windows faced a patio overlooking a glittering stretch of the Avery. She could imagine those doors thrown wide in summer, and how lovely it would be to dance alongside the riverbank, under the stars and city lights. "I have about 5 minutes before I need to make my rounds," Archer said, his eyes following Clarice as she patrolled the room. "She'll expect an auction for me on a night like this." Selena's stomach turned over, and she found herself reaching for his hand, but he just gave her a bemused smile. "Just a few more weeks, right?" There was still enough bitterness that she squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "Right," she swore. Archer jerked his chin toward a stocky, middle-aged man holding court with a group of well-dressed people. "That's Davis," he said under his breath. "I haven't seen much during my visits, but I think he might be a key leader in this group." "You're assuming that based on glimpsing some papers in the house?" Archer slid his hands into his pockets. "One night about 2 months ago, I was here when 3 of his friends came over, all of them clients of mine too. It was urgent, they said, and when Davis slipped out of the bedroom..." She gave him a half-smile. "You somehow accidentally overheard everything?" Archer smiled, but it faded as he again looked at Davis, who was pouring wine for the people assembled around him, including some young women who looked a year or two shy of 16. Selena's own smile vanished as well. This was a side of Rifthold that she hadn't missed in the least. They spent more time ranting about the king than making plans, and regardless of what they might claim, I don't think they truly care about Aelin... Where's that pronunciation? Galanthinius. Okay. Aelin Galanthinius. I want to add an N there. I want to say Galanthinius, but it's not. Okay, and it's throwing me off. I think they just want to find a ruler who best serves their interests, and maybe they only want her to raise an army so their businesses can thrive during the war that would ensue. if they aid her, give her badly needed supplies, then she'd owe them. They want a puppet queen, not a true ruler. Of course they would want something like that. Are they even from Terrason? No. Davis's family was, years ago, but he spent his whole life in Rifthold. If he claims loyalty to Terrason, it's only a half-truth. She ground her teeth. Self-serving bastards. Archer shrugged. That may be true, but they've also rescued a good number of would-be victims from the king's gallows, apparently. The night his friends burst into the house, it was because they'd managed to save one of their informants from being interrogated by the king. They smuggled him out of Rifthold before dawn broke the next day. Did CoM know about this? Given how he'd reacted to killing Kane, she didn't think torturing and hanging traitors were a part of his duties, or were even mentioned to him, or Dorian, for that matter. But if Cale wasn't in charge of interrogating possible traitors, then who was? Was this person the source who had given the king his latest list of traitors to the crown? There would be too many things to consider, too many secrets and tangled webs. Selena asked, "Do you think you can get me into Davis's office right now? I want to look around." Archer smirked. "My darling, why do you think I brought you over here?" He smoothly led her to the nearby side door, a servant's entrance. No one noticed as they slipped through, and if they had, Archer's hands roaming over her bodice, her arms, her shoulders, her neck, would suggest that they were going through the door for some privacy. A seductive smile on his face, Archer tugged her down the small hallway, then up the stairs, always taking care to keep his hands moving on her lest anyone see them. But all the servants were preoccupied, and the upstairs hall was clear and quiet, its wood-paneled walls and red carpeting immaculate. The paintings here, several from artists she recognized, were worth a small fortune. Archer moved with a stealth that probably came from years of slipping in and out of bedrooms. He led her to a set of locked double doors. Before she could pull one of Philippa's pins from her hair to unlock it, a pick appeared in Archer's hand. He gave her a conspirator's grin. A heartbeat after that, the office door swung open, revealing a room lined with bookshelves over an ornate blue carpet with potted ferns scattered throughout. A large desk sat in the center, 2 armchairs before it, and a chaise sprawled near a darkened fireplace. Selena paused in the doorway, pressing on her bodice just to feel the slender dagger tucked inside. She brushed her legs together, checking the 2 daggers strapped to her thighs. "I should go downstairs," Archer said, glancing at the hallway behind them. The sounds of a waltz floated up from the ballroom. "Try to be quick." She raised an eyebrow, even though the mask covered her features. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" He leaned in, brushing his lips against her neck. "I wouldn't dream of it," he said onto her skin. Then he turned and was gone. Selena quickly shut the door, then strode to the windows at the other side of the room and closed the curtains. The dim light shining beneath the door was enough to see by as she moved to the ironwood desk and lit a candle. The evening papers, a stack of response cards from tonight's mask, a personal expenses ledger. Normal. Completely normal. She searched the rest of the desk, rifling through the drawers and knocking on every surface to check for trick compartments. When that yielded nothing, she walked to one of the bookcases, tapping the books to see whether any were hollowed out. She was about to turn away when a title caught her eye. A book with a single word mark written on the spine in blood-red ink. She pulled it out and rushed to the desk, setting down the candle as she opened the book. It was full of word marks, every page covered with them, and with words in a language she didn't recognize. Nehemiah had said it was a secret knowledge, that the word marks were so old they'd been forgotten for centuries. Titles like this had been burned with the rest of the books on magic. She had found one in the palace library, The Walking Dead, but that had been a fluke. The art of using the word marks was lost. Only Nehemiah's family knew how to properly use their power. But here, in her hands, she flipped through the book. Someone had written a sentence on the inside of the back cover, and Selena brought the candle closer as she peered at what had been scribbled. It was a riddle, or some strange turn of phrase. It is only with the eye that one can see rightly. But what in the hell did it mean? And what was Davis, some half-corrupt businessman, doing with a book on word marks? Of all things. If he was trying to interfere with the king's plans, for the sake of Aurelia, she prayed the king had never even heard of word marks. She memorized the riddle. She would write it down when she returned to the castle, maybe ask Nehemiah if she knew what it meant, or if she'd heard of Davis. Archer might have given her vital information, but he obviously didn't know everything. Fortunes had been broken upon the loss of magic. People who had made their living for years by harnessing its power were suddenly left with nothing. It would seem natural for them to seek out another source of power, even though the king had outlawed it. But what? Footsteps sounded down the hall. Selena swiftly put the book back on the shelf, then looked to the window. Her dress was too big and the window too small and high for her to easily make it out that way, and with no other exit. The lock in the double doors clicked. Selena leaned against the desk, whipping out her handkerchief, bowing her shoulders, and starting a miserable sniffle sob as Davis entered his study. The short, solid man paused at the sight of her, the smile that had been on his face fading. Thankfully, he was alone. She popped up, doing her best to look embarrassed. "Oh," she said, dabbing her eyes with her kerchief through the holes in her mask. "Oh, I'm sorry. I needed a place to be alone for a moment and they said I could come in here." Davis's eyes narrowed, then shifted to the key in the lock. "How did you get in?" A smooth, slippery voice dripping with calculation and a hint of fear. She let out a shuddering sniffle. "The housekeeper." Hopefully, the poor woman wouldn't be flayed alive after this. Selena hitched her voice, stumbling and rushing through the words. "My betrothed left me." Honestly, she sometimes wondered if there was something a bit wrong with her for being able to cry so easily. Davis took her in again, his lips curling, not out of sympathy, she realized, but from disgust at the silly, weepy woman sniffling about her fiancé, as if it would be a colossal waste of his precious time to comfort a person in pain. The thought of Archer having to serve these people, who looked at him like he was a toy to be used until he was broken. She focused on her breathing. She just had to get out of here without raising Davis's suspicions. One word to the guards down the hall and she'd be in more trouble than she wanted, and might possibly drag Archer down with her. She let out another shudder sniffle. "There's a ladies' powder room on the first floor," Davis said, stepping toward her to escort her out. "Perfect." As he approached, he pulled off the bird mask he wore, revealing a face that had probably been handsome in its youth. Age and too much drinking had pummeled it into saggy cheeks, thinning straw blonde hair, and a dull complexion. Capillaries had burst on the tip of his nose, staining it a purplish red that offset his watery gray eyes. He stopped close enough to touch her and held out a hand. She dabbed her eyes one more time, then slipped her handkerchief back into her dress pocket. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at the floor as she took his hand. I'm sorry for intruding." She heard his sudden intake of breath before she caught the flash of metal. "Huh?" She had him disabled and on the floor in a heartbeat, but not fast enough to avoid the sting of Davis's dagger slicing into her forearm. The yards of fabric that made up her dress were cumbersome as she pinned him to the carpet, a thin line of blood welling up and trickling down her bare arm. "No one has the keys to this study," Davis hissed, despite his prone position. "Brave or foolish, not even my housekeeper." Selena shifted her hand, going for the points in his neck that would render him unconscious. If she could hide her forearm, then she could slip out of here unnoticed. "What were you looking for?" Davis demanded, his breath reeking of wine as he wriggled against her hold. She didn't bother to answer, and he surged up, trying to dislodge her. She slammed her weight into him, lifting her hand to deliver the blow. He chuckled softly. "Don't you want to know what was on that blade?" She could have ripped his face off with her fingernails for the silken smile he gave her. In a smooth, swift movement, she snatched up his dagger and sniffed. She'd never forget that musky smell, not in 1,000 lives. Y'all, not that poison. Not that one. Not that one. Not in 1,000 lifetimes. Gloriella, a mild poison that caused hours of paralysis. It had been used the night she was captured to knock her down, to make her helpless to fight back as she was handed over to the king's men and thrown into the royal dungeons. Davis's smile turned triumphant. "Just enough to knock you out until my guards arrive, and bring you to a more private location, where she'd be tortured," he didn't need to add. Bastard! How much had she been exposed to? The cut was shallow and short, but she knew the Gloriella was already racing through her, just as it had on the days after she'd lain beside Sam's broken corpse, smelling the musky smoke still clinging to him. She had to go. Now. She shifted her free hand to knock him out, but her fingers felt brittle, disconnected, and despite being short, he was strong. Someone must have trained him, because in a too-fast movement, he grabbed her wrists, twisting her to the ground. Fuck, I lost my spot. Sorry. She slammed into the carpet so hard the air was knocked from her lungs. Her head spun, and she lost her grip on the dagger. The Gloriella was acting fast. Too fast. She had to get out. A bolt of panic went through her, pure and undiluted. Her confounded dress got in the way, but she focused what little control remained on bringing up her legs and kicking, so hard he let go for a moment. Bitch. He lunged for her again, but she already grabbed his poisoned dagger. A heartbeat later, he was clutching his neck as his blood sprayed on her dress, on her hands. He collapsed to the side, grasping at his throat as though he could hold it together, keep his life's blood from spewing. He was making a familiar gurgling noise, but Selena didn't give him the mercy of ending it as she staggered to her feet. No, she didn't give him a parting glance as she took the dagger and ripped the skirts of her gowns up to her knees. A moment after, she was at his office window, studying the guards and parked carriages below. Each thought fuzzier than the last as she climbed onto the ledge. She didn't know how she made it, or how long it took, but suddenly she was on the ground and sprinting toward the open front gate. The guards, or footmen, or servants started shouting, and she was running as fast as she could, losing control of her body with each heartbeat that pumped the Gloriella through her. They were in the wealthy part of the city, near the Royal Theatre, and she scanned the skyline, searching for the glass castle. There, the glowing towers had never seemed more beautiful, more welcoming. She had to get back. Her vision blurring, Selena gritted her teeth and ran. I'm on chapter 12. About to be done with chapter 12. Chapter 13 is on the next page. She had enough awareness to snatch a cloak off a drunk dozing on a corner and wipe the blood from her face, even though it took several tries to get her hands steady as she ran. Once the cloak concealed her ruined dress, she made for the main gates of the castle grounds, where the guards recognized her, though the lights were too dim for them to look closely. The wound had been short and shallow. She could make it. She just had to get inside, get to safety. But she stumbled on the winding road leading up to the castle, and her run turned into a staggering walk before she even got to the castle itself. She couldn't go in the front like this, not unless she wanted everyone to see, not unless she wanted everyone to know who was responsible for Davis's death. She swayed with every step as she made for a side entrance, where studded iron doors were left partially open to the night. The barracks. Not the best place to enter, but good enough. Maybe the guards would be discreet. One foot in front of the other, just a little farther. She didn't remember getting to the barracks doors, only the bite of the metal studs as she pushed them open. The light of the hall burned her eyes, but at least she was inside. The door to the mess hall was open, and the sounds of laughter and clinking mugs floated toward her. Was she numb from the cold, or was it the Gloriella taking over? She had to tell someone what antidote to give her. Just tell someone. One hand braced against the wall, the other holding her cloak tightly around her. She slipped past the mess hall, every breath lasting a lifetime. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. There was one door down this hall that she had to reach, one room where she'd be safe. She kept her hand on the stone wall, counting the doors she passed. So close. Her cloak caught on the handle of a door as she passed by and ripped away. But she made it to that door, to the room where she'd be safe. Her fingers didn't quite feel the grain of the wood as she pushed against the door and swayed on the threshold. Bright light, a blur of wood and stone and paper, and through the haze a face she knew, gaping at her from behind a desk. A choked noise came out of her throat, and she looked down at herself long enough to see the blood covering her white dress, her arms, her hands. In the blood she could see Davis, and the open gash across his throat. "Cale," she moaned, seeking the familiar face. But he was already running, smashing through his office. He bellowed her name as her knees buckled and she fell. She saw only the golden brown of his eyes and held on long enough to whisper, "Gloriella," before everything tilted and went back black. Chapter 13. That was dramatic. It was one of the longest nights of Cale's life. Every second had passed by with horrific clarity, every agonizing second as Selena lay there on the floor of his office, her bodice covered in so much blood that he couldn't tell where she was bleeding, and with all the stupid layers of frills and pleats, he couldn't see the entry wounds. So he'd lost it, utterly lost it. There was no thought in his head beyond a roaring panic as he shut the door, took out his hunting knife, and ripped open her dress right there. But there were no wounds, only a sheathed stiletto that clattered to the floor and a scratch on her forearm. With the dress ripped away, there was hardly any blood on her, and that's when the panic cleared, enough for him to remember what she'd whispered. Gloriella, a poison used to temporarily paralyze victims. Everything from then on became a series of steps, quietly summoning Ress, telling the young, talented guard to keep his mouth shut and to find whatever healers were closest, wrapping her in his cloak so no one could see the blood on her skin, scooping her up and carrying her to her rooms, barking orders at the healers, and finally pinning her down on the bed as they forced the antidote down her throat until she choked on it. When the long, long hours spent holding her as she vomited twisting her hair back, snarling at anyone who entered the room. God damn it. When she was sleeping soundly at last, he sat by her, still watching over her as he sent Ress and his most trustworthy men into the city and warned them not to come back without answers. When they did return and told him about the businessman apparently murdered by his own poisoned dagger, Cale pieced together enough of what had happened to be sure of one thing. He was glad Davis was dead, because if Davis had survived, Cale would have gone back to finish the job himself. Selena awoke. Her mouth was bone dry and her head pounded, but she could move. She could wiggle her toes and her fingers, and she recognized the smell of the sheets well enough to know that she was in her bed, in her room, and that she was safe. Her eyelids were heavy as she opened them, blinking away the blurriness that still lingered. Her stomach ached, but the Gloriella had worn off. She looked to her left, and as if she'd somehow known, even in sleep, where he was. Cale dozed in the chair, his arms and legs sprawled out, his head tipped back, exposing the unbuttoned collar of his tunic and the strong column of his throat. From the angle of the sunlight, it was probably around dawn. "Cale," she rasped. He was instantly awake and alert, leaning toward her as if he, too, always knew where she was. When he saw her, that hand that had lurched toward his sword relaxed. "You're awake," he said, his voice a dark rumble, laced with temper. "How are you feeling?" She looked at herself. Someone had washed away the blood and put her in a nightgown. Just moving her head made everything spin. "Horrible," she admitted. He put his head in his hands, bracing his elbows on his knees. "Before you say anything else, just tell me this. Did you kill Davis because you were snooping in his office? He caught you and then cut you with a drugged blade?" A flash of teeth, a flicker of rage in those golden brown eyes. Her insides twisted up at the memory, but she nodded. "Very well," he said, standing up. "Are you going to tell the king?" He crossed his arms, coming to the edge of the bed and staring down at her. "No." Again, that volatile temper burned in his eyes. "Because I don't feel like having to argue that you're still capable of spying without getting caught. My men will keep their mouths shut too. But the next time you do anything like this, I'm going to throw you in the dungeons." "For killing him?" "For scaring the hell out of me." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing for a moment, then whirled, pointing at her. "Do you know what you looked like when you showed up?" I'll hazard a guess and say bad. A flat stare. "If I hadn't burned your dress, I'd make you look at it right now." "You burned my dress?" He splayed his arms. "You want proof of what you did lying around? You could get in trouble for covering for me like this." "I'll deal with it if it comes to that." "Oh? You'll deal with it?" He leaned over the bed, bracing his hands on the mattress as he snarled in her face. "Yes, I'll deal with it." I'm so easily swayed. It is pathetic. "Yes, I'll deal with it." She gulped, but her mouth was so dry she had nothing to swallow. Beyond his anger, there was enough lingering fear in his eyes that she winced. "It was that bad?" He slumped onto the edge of the mattress. "You were sick. Really sick. We didn't know how much Gloriella was in the wound, so the healers erred on the safe side and gave you a strong dose of the antidote, which caused you to spend a few hours with your head in a bucket." "I don't remember any of that. I barely remember getting back to the castle." He shook his head and stared at the wall. Dark smudges lay under his eyes, stubble coated his jaw, and utter exhaustion lined every inch of his body. He probably hadn't fallen asleep until a little while ago. She'd hardly known where she was going with the Gloriella, while the Gloriella tore through her. All she'd known was that she had to get someplace safe, and somehow she had wound up exactly where she knew she'd be the safest. That's cute, I guess. That's cute, I guess. Should we read 14? How many pages is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess Kale's alright. Like, I guess he's alright. He's not as bad as he originally was. It was just that one comment that really threw me off, I guess, where he was like, what did you do to deserve it? And I was kind of just like turned off by that. But he's not bad, I guess. He's alright. But I know that he's not who she ends up with. So this is just further going to solidify the fact that he's going to die. Yeah, like her characters aren't cookie cutter perfect. Even Selena has questionable choices. But I also like the growth there. And that it wasn't originally, like, I guess I should have known that it was always Kale, because it was literally Kale leading her through. Like, Kale was the first person that we knew outside of, like, the Assassin's Blade that Selena was introduced to, because he was, like, leading her around to get to Dorian. I think we'll stop here. Yeah, I think that here's a good stopping point. I don't know what I do with my bookmark. Oh, it's right here. Yeah, I think this is a good stopping point. The mistakes make the character development chef's kiss. Yeah, I definitely like Kale's character development from when we first started to him now. I always thought he was going to be that grumpy turned soft kind of guy, which is, honestly, I don't know why I didn't prefer Kale to Dorian, because Kale is literally like what I look for in that enemies to lovers trope, where he's just like this grumpy man. He hates everyone. He hates everything except for the few select people in like his little circle. And then he meets this like flirty, charismatic girl and he just melts. And he's just like putty in her hand. So I really don't know. I think I just liked Dorian. Well, because Dorian is so, he's just so nice. And he's so sweet. He's more likable compared to the first book, but I'm still Team Dorian. Yeah, I think I would still be, I think I'm still Team Dorian too. I love Dorian. I just think if maybe they had met when he was like a little bit older and like more secure in himself, because he's still very young and he's still like kind of like a coward. He hasn't really had any like instances where he's had to like step up, you know? So I feel like if they would have met later, maybe they would have worked out a little bit better. Well, I don't know. I can't wait to see Dorian grow as well, because I really hope that she doesn't turn him into this like jealous, petty prince and who's like mad at Kale and Selena for like being together. Like, I really hope that he can be happy. I want him to be happy. He deserves it. Especially since that first girl that he was in love with apparently broke his heart too. Like, this man is just getting his heart broken left and right. Like, aww. I will say that I did get the ick when Selena was getting the shit beat out of her and he didn't do anything. Like, I know why he didn't do anything, but like, just still the fact that he didn't even like try. I was just like, but his like point of view when he's talking about Selena is my favorite. He thinks the world of her, and it was so cute. Almost out of water. Yeah, I think it's a good stopping point. We should stop because I'm about to be out of water. Isn't my cup so cute? It's little Kurapika. Oh, and little Gon. And Killua. I don't know why they put Hisoka on here. I hate him. God, I hate that character. It makes me so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. But yes, Dorian is everything. This book is amazing. It's definitely stressing me out more than the first one. I will say that between the two, I think I like this one more so far because I'm like stressed reading it, and I love being stressed while reading books. So I've only seen like 15 episodes of Hunter. You should absolutely watch it. It's my favorite anime. And it's the only anime, actually no, that's not true because I did that with Attack on Titan. But after the show ended, it's the only anime that I've read all of the manga for. Which, girl, if you like stress. Okay, I don't like stress, but when you're stressed, reading a book that lets you know that it's good. Like, I don't like it. I don't like it. In the moment, I don't like it. But then later I go back and I'm like, oh, that book really made me feel something. You know? Just like when I was reading The Assassin's Blade. So when I was reading The Assassin's Blade, I wasn't having fun. I hated every single moment of it. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to drive into oncoming traffic. I was devastated. Hated it. But now that I look back on it, I'm like, that book was really good. It makes me want to reread it, but skip the end. You know? It makes you feel something. You'll never forget reading these books for the first time. Which is why, like, I'm so happy that I document, like, all of my reactions. Or, like, not all of them, but, like, basically all of my reactions and just, like, all of my thoughts. Because even with, like, A Court of Thorns and Roses, I still go back and I rewatch, like, my old videos from when I was first reading, like, the series to y'all. And I'm just like, oh, that was such a good time in my life. And, like, I was, like, you know, having fun and reading this book. And then, you know, it's fun to like go back and watch things that like your first like reactions and stuff. I'm not excited for Pain. Okay, y'all, to be like honestly, scale of 1 to like 10, is the pain in these books really that bad? Because I can't see it, and I'm saying this obviously because I don't have any other background knowledge about who she's gonna meet and like who, you know, but like, is it really that bad? Is it really that bad? The limit does not exist. 13? I ugly cried about a lot of stuff. Cause like right now, obviously I know it's not good, like nothing sad is gonna happen in like the beginning books, but like, I don't know. You'll definitely need the hoodie. Okay. I guess. Which is like, okay, but like, is it worse than Sam's death? I obviously don't want to know what happens. But, like, okay, so Sam's death right now for me is like up here. Is it about the same as Sam's death? Or like, maybe like it hurts like Sam's death, but not as much? Or like, through the roof worse than Sam's death? Because that death will live for me, will live with me forever. I mean, y'all saw, I can't even hear his name and I'm crying. Yes, I ugly cried so bad. I cried more. You'll find out eventually, I guess. I just like to be prepared. I like to go in, which is why I was so surprised. I was so surprised that I had no idea about Sam's death. Sam's death was honestly a total and complete, I was just a shock. I was blindsided. I did not expect it. I did not see it coming. I mean, I kind of did reading her when she was pacing all night and when she was just like, where is he? Da da da. I was like, fuck. Like, and like, obviously, like, leading up to their plan to assassinate him or Farron, like, I knew that something bad was gonna happen, but like no one said anything on my videos, which props to y'all, because like obviously for like my Tamlin videos, like everyone was just like, oh, this isn't gonna age well, but like no one said anything on my videos when I was raving about Sam. That gave me a sense of security. And I had that sense of security literally ripped out from under my feet whenever I read that Sam had died. Like, it was literally, I was blindsided. And I think that's what added on to the pain, because I really didn't see it coming. I didn't see it getting to that point. But I always tell people to read The Assassin's Blade first. No, I absolutely agree that you should read Assassin's Blade first. Like, based on where I am right now, I'm honestly really glad that I read it first, because like my reaction to Wesley killing Farron would have been nothing if I hadn't read The Assassin's Blade first, because I wouldn't even know who Wesley was or why that was such like a big deal to Selena. So like, I'm glad that I read The Assassin's Blade first. It hurt like a bitch, and I still cannot talk about Sam without crying, but I'm glad that I read it first. Sorry if I got loud. I got very passionate there. I felt it. Yeah, I know a lot of people read Throne of Glass before. Okay, and my friend texted me, because she's one of my TikToks. She's my friend here that we're from the same town. She texted me. She's like, oh, one of your TikToks popped up on my free page. And I was like, fuck. I hate when people text me that. And then she was like, I read Throne of Glass. Like, should I continue reading it? And I was like, yes, absolutely. But don't read the second book. Go back and read The Assassin's Blade. I told her, you're going to have, you have the main thing spoiled for you, but it's still gonna, like, it's just gonna add more juice to this. I feel like it does. Oh yeah, I guess it kind of sucked for y'all that like read Throne of Glass whenever it first came out. I didn't know these books had been out for so goddamn long. These books have been out for a long. People are like, I read those books when I was in middle school, and I was like, what the I was reading the Hunger Games in middle school. Like, I had no idea about this. I would have wanted to read this. I had no idea. Well, I definitely think SJM should have put out The Assassin's Blade first. Hello! Come on now. I really think she should have. I think she should have started with that one. And I don't understand why she didn't. Maybe I'll understand when I get to like later books, but like, I don't understand why she didn't. Wow. That hurt like a bitch. Maybe that's why they didn't want to put out like a really sad book. The pain of waiting for every book. Yikes. I don't think I've ever had to wait for any, actually, like back when I used to like read avidly, like series on series, like that's not true. I had to wait for the Hunger Games. I had to wait for Mockingjay, I think, to come out. She wrote Throne of Glass when she was 16. Oh my god. How do you write a book at 16? Y'all, I don't think I haven't thought about writing a little book myself, but I get in front of that computer, I can write like okay, confession time. I used to write fanfics when I was like in middle school. I would write like one and I would be dead, wiped clean, like just I don't understand how people can write books, like big books, because you just said that I think the last book of this series is like 1,000 pages. How do you have that many words in your brain to put together to write? I read A Court of Thorns and Roses first and fell in love, so ordered the whole series. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses first also, but I did not fall in love with that series. I really liked it, but I wouldn't say that that's what inspired me to read this series. You guys really inspired me to read this series. Yeah, almost 1,000. That's just too many fucking pages. And I have to read. You know what? I've never backed down from a challenge, so whatever. It's a book, and I enjoy it, so it'll be fun. Alright, I read them as they came out. We all had to beg her. Yeah, literally collectively, everyone had to either bully me or beg me to read this series because I thought it was going to be like A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I was just like, it was good, but I don't think I would want to read it, like another series like that again from her. But then I started reading it and I was like, oh, this is different. Like, this is different. This and A Court of Thorns and Roses are in 2 different categories. I don't know, like, but this is some good shit. Thermal Glass was my first S-sham, but because the Court of Thorns and Roses didn't exist yet. Yeah. No, definitely, I agree. A Court of Thorns and Roses is just for fun, cause like nothing, like they discuss heavy topics and heavy things do happen, but like no one finds the corpse of their beloved after being tortured all night, dead and disfigured and lays with it for hours on a table. You know, it has 2 completely different vibes. So that's another reason why I didn't think anything really bad was gonna happen in the Assassin's Blade. And you know, when you read something sad, like when you read that someone dies, okay, so like, example, when Reese died, you could tell he was gonna come back. Like, he was dead, but it didn't have that final sense to it. Do you know what I mean? Sam literally had that final sense. I just want to say I love my baby Kale. Also, I love you, B. Oh, I love you, Jules. Also, Kale is growing on me, so I might join you on that ship soon if he doesn't fuck it up by opening his mouth again. But I forgot. I lost my train of thought now. Fuck. Yeah. I have reread Throne of Glass a ridiculous amount of time. I wish Throne of Glass had the fake death. That's literally what I said whenever I was reading Sam's death. I was like, I want the fake death trope back. I really thought I could take it, and I ate my fucking words because I could not take it. Oh my god. And yesterday, y'all, I went home crying because I was just thinking about what Selena had said about, look, I'm gonna make myself cry. when Kale had asked her, did Sam love you? And she was like, yes, very much. Do you know how loved you have to be by someone? Like, do you know how to just be able to say that so confidently? Like, yes, that man loved me with his entire heart. Like, all the shit that he probably did for her. And I can't. At the end of the day, it should have always been him. Always. And the fact that it wasn't him is just gonna... Oh my god. It's just gonna eat me alive for the rest of my life. I'm out of water. Alright, y'all. Ending on a bad note, but whatever. I will see y'all... Oh, not tomorrow. Oh, I won't see y'all tomorrow. Boo. But... sometimes I'm happy and then I think about Sam and ruin my day. Literally me! Sometimes I go back and I look at that fucking fan art of him on the table and I lose it whenever I need a good cry. But yeah, anyway, Sam. Oh, Sam. I will see you guys on Saturday. Let me think. 1:30 or 2. Let's do 1:30. 1:30 p.m. Central Time. I don't know what time that is for y'all, but I'll schedule it so y'all should be able to see. And we will read the next couple of chapters. And yeah, I'll see you guys on Saturday. Bye!